Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Fusion 360 Tech Tuesday. My name is Brad Tallis from Autodesk, and today's topic we're going to talk about some tips on 3D printing from Fusion. And this is actually a real-world example. My son is in high school and they're teaching Fusion 360 at his school, and they were tasked with designing a couple gears, as you can see here. And you rotate them and they mesh together, etc. And they basically sit on these posts. So he wanted to 3D print them and take them in and show how they worked. And so he sent them to the printer. But when he went to assemble them, so here's the base and here's the gear, right? He went to assemble them and it doesn't fit. So he wasn't able to show how they worked. And he was like, well, why is that? And so that's what we're going to talk about in today's live stream is creating 3D printed parts. You have to take into consideration some tolerances. And I'm just going to show a couple tips on what I usually do on creating some of the stuff that I print. And you can see from the back here, I like 3D printing. We're going to talk about printing, large objects like this stormtrooper helmet, etc. So let's dive right in. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is dealing with the tolerances. In fact, you can actually see this one is now fixed, and you can see that slight gap between the post and the gear. And this is what's allowing that to rotate. And every 3D printer is different. Some might have tighter tolerances than others. And so what I do is I create what I would call almost like gauge blocks for testing out shafts and holes. So you can see here, I just created a really basic part. And if we were to inspect this surface here, we can see that that's a 1/2 inch diameter post. And then I print this and I say, okay, that's supposed to be a 1/2 inch. And let me go ahead and show you here. So here's that part. You can kind of see it here. I'll take my tool. Let me switch to inches really quick. And I just measure across that, and I can't see what it looks like. It's exactly 1/2 inch. So this makes me happy. My printer is pretty darn perfect for printing that post. Now, you'll notice over here, I have a bunch of rings, basically, and I've thrown some text on there. And what I do is basically create a gauge block of different sizes, okay? And when we print that, it ends up looking something like this. And so what this allows me to do is I can now come in here, and I know the very first one is 1/2 inch, and I can see that that actually does not fit. There's no tolerance there whatsoever. And hopefully, I don't know how well this is going to share. But then what I can do is I've gone up about 5 thousandths on each of these. So I can see that one still doesn't fit. That one starts to fit, but doesn't go down the post very well, so that's still too tight. And I can just keep working along until, so here, for example, that one slides on fairly easily. And then this one here, again, slides on fairly easily. So that's the 0.52 and the 0.525. So if we switch back here, it was this one right here, this 0.52 and this 0.525. Okay, so then what I do is I know that that's fairly close. Oops, I meant to drag. So then I created another one where I went up, 0.525, 0.526, 0.527, and printed that out to just, basically tie in that tolerance even more to figure out what is the best one. Now, you don't have to do this. It depends on how much slop you want or how tight you want that to fit. But this basically allows me to kind of dial in and figure out which is the best one. So let me switch back here. So this is the second one that I printed. This is the first one. you know, where I went from 0.51 to 0.525. I'll do the exact same thing here. So I'll kind of test fit, you know, and it allows me to just basically get where I feel the best fit is. And I don't know if you can hear, you know, the scraping or whatever going on. But actually right about here is the one that I really like the best. The last one just a little bit too loose for me. So the 0.529 is the one that I really like. And I know that if I have a 0.5 inch post, I want to make the hole or whatever that fits over that to be 0.529. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I did this in Fusion. So basically what I did, I'm going to show how I created these, and then I'm going to show you how do you add this, you know, 0.529 to your designs. So a couple little tips and tricks here. I'm going to switch, in this case, I'm going to switch into inch, since that's what I've been talking about so far. I'll create a sketch. And actually the very first tip I should show you in regards to 3D printing is right up here. You'll notice that my Z direction is pointing up. Okay? If I go into my preferences, you'll see default modeling orientation. And sometimes it could be Y up or it could be Z up. And if you're doing a lot of 3D printing or CAM, for example, I would definitely recommend switching that to Z, because a lot of the slicers out there say that Z is in the up and down direction. So we want to kind of match that. If it was Y up, when I go to 3D print, my parts will be 90 degrees from the bed, which isn't a big deal, but it's just one more step that you need to deal with. So the very first thing I want to do is make sure that my Z is up. Okay. Then I'm going to come in and create a sketch, and let's just draw it on this kind of this top plane. And I'm just going to create a circle. And in this case, let's just do maybe, let's just do 1 inch. Okay. Then I'm going to create another circle inside of that. And we know that we want to start at about 0.5. So I'm going to say 0.5. So I just created 2 circles. Which basically, you know, creates this kind of this washer shape. Now I'm going to pattern this. I'm going to do a rectangular pattern. Just draw a box around everything and start to drag. Now I could leave the spacing like this, but then it's going to print out a whole bunch of individual blocks, gauge blocks if you want to call them that, which, you know, is I think harder to manage and deal with or whatever. So I actually overlap them just a little bit, something like this, for example. And let's do maybe 4 in one direction, and I'll come down and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to overlap them a little bit, like so. And let's just do 2 in this direction. Now, because it's a pattern, all of these are the exact same size. So I can't come in and change this. It's basically creating a copy of this original and patterning it. However, if I zoom up, you can see this kind of this little square icon I just clicked on right there. That's actually the pattern constraint. And if I double click on it, it actually allows me to come in and edit my pattern. So if you ever need to come back and change your pattern, you just click on that icon. But what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to select it and then say delete. So we used the pattern to kind of create our shape, but now they're no longer linked. So for example, I could come in and throw a dimension on this guy and say, you know, 0.505. And it's going to be kind of hard to see, but you'll see that these circles are changing now. So then I could say, you know, 0.51, and you see that got a little bit bigger. And so all I have to do is just, you know, quickly come in here and say 0.515, and continue going through this. Okay, so this is how I created my gauge blocks. So the tip here to take away is the fact that you can use the pattern to kind of create your shape and then delete that pattern constraint and then come in and tweak with this. So let's just say 0.53 and then finally 0.535 or something. And again, you can make these dimensions whatever you want. So I'm going, in a fairly large step, first of all, so for example, let's go ahead and create a circle, another circle over here, and let's make that 0.535. So we're actually taking a look at hole diameters between these two lines. So hopefully my printer is good enough to be able to print pretty high quality between these two. And so I'm able to then really kind of narrow down the exact size that I want for clearance. So I'll stop my sketch, and then you just basically have to select your profiles. Now you're noticing I'm going to have to come in here and select a whole bunch of these little faces and all that kind of stuff, which would take quite some time. So instead, let's just do a press pull. I'll draw a box around the whole thing, and then I can come in and clear out the big regions, the circles. So I think that's much faster than trying to have to select all of these little tiny ellipses that you see. So another tip, just kind of simplify your process there. Now, if I wanted to, I could take these sections out if I want to, which is kind of how I did it in mine. And then I'm going to go a specific distance. Let's go, in this case, 0.125. Now, why would I want to do that? Well, we're using this as a gauge block to see what size circles they are, but I can also use it to check my thicknesses. So if I say print 0.125, I could then measure that with my micrometer here. I could say, okay, let's measure that distance and see what the distance is. Of course, my micrometer turned off. And in this case, it's 0.1, which is probably what I made it in my original print. Instead of 0.125, I probably just did 0.1. But that way I can verify what, sorry about the reflection, what thickness this is. Okay, so another way to kind of help use this one tool in multiple different ways. Now, what I did was I actually created some text, and I'm going to do one of those. But I'm going to click on this face, right mouse click, and create a sketch. Okay. Then I'll go into my text command, kind of put the text where I want it to be, and let's just say 0.50. Now, you'll notice I can do a vertical flip, a horizontal flip. I can change the size. Let's just make that 0.125. That's a little small, so let's try 0.2. That looks a little bit better. And maybe I'll make it bold. Okay, and then I'll position that where I want. I just grab that little round ball with the crosshairs, and I can kind of move that where I want that text to be. I could come in and change the font if I want to. I'm just going to go ahead and say OK. Now this is still text. Now I could copy this, so I'm going to Control-C, Control-V. So just like you would copy text or a photograph or something like that, I did a Control-C, and then I did a Control-V for paste, and I'm able to drag that across. Okay. So now let's pretend I did all of my text. What I need to do is to select it, right mouse click, and say Explode Text. I get this question quite often. It's like, okay, I can create the text, but I can't do anything with it. As soon as I say Explode Text, you'll notice that it turns it into a profile. Okay, so I'll do the same thing over here. I'm going to edit this text first of all. Let's say 505. Maybe drag that a little bit to the left. Maybe look at it from the top again. Kind of move that in place where I want it. And then I could come in here and say explode text. And now that's its own little profile. Then I could come in and extrude this. So I'll go ahead and select my profiles. Now you'll notice that this is taking some time, and think about how many circles I have, and if I'm doing 2 or 3 of these gauge blocks or whatever, this could take some time to do. So now I'm going to extrude this up, and let's just say 0.05 or something like that. I'll say OK, and you can see that it actually extruded that text as part of our gauge block. Now, like I mentioned, that could take some time. So another trick that I do, so I'm going to undo back. Another trick that I do is I create a reference. So instead of using text, I might come in here and just put a notch. I'll just do something like on this guy here. And I'll extrude that through the part. So I'm just going to click on that face there, and I just create a notch like this. Now I'm not having to do any text, but I can go ahead and turn on my sketch. And here's another tip for you. If you right mouse click on your sketch and say show dimension, I'm going to go ahead and click on show dimension. And I'm still in 3D. I'm not in my sketch environment or anything like that. I'm actually able to see my dimensions in 3D. So now you can kind of see what that looks like. And when I print this, I could just come back and look at my screen and say, okay, I know that this is the 0.5 one, and this is the one that I liked. Okay, that's 0.53. So instead of taking all that time to create the text and extrude it and type it in, etc., I'm just going to use this kind of as a reference. So another time saver. I looked over at the chat window really quick, and I saw somebody asked, why do you have to explode the text? And that's a really good question. Basically, you want to turn it into a profile. So let me show you again. I'm going to click on this guy. We'll just say create a sketch, and I'll do my text. So I really appreciate these questions. I know Aaron's helping me out here answering some of these questions for me. So I'm going to rotate that around, make it bold, change the size. I think we said 0.2 was good. Okay, right now it's just regular text. If I say OK, I can edit this text. So you'll notice I can say edit. I can add stuff to it. So text 2, for example. I could change the size, the angle, etc. But if I say stop sketch, you'll notice I can't really do anything with it. I can edit it, but I can't extrude or anything. So if I try clicking on this, you'll notice I don't get the option, for example, to extrude. Okay. However, if I click on it and say explode text, you'll notice it looks like a profile. It's no longer blue on the inside, and there's actual profiles here. The drawback with this is, if I right mouse click, there's no edit text, right? We've basically said take that text and turn it into a profile. So you want to make sure that you've got your text the way you want it to look before you explode it. Okay, so great question there. Okay. Let me undo back to here. So I saw somebody said you can click on the text and say press pull, and you'll notice that does work. Okay, so I think it was Chris that said that. So yes, very good point. You can use the press pull command, which is basically offsetting faces or extruding faces or doing a fillet depending on what you've selected. So yes, you can do the press pull. Great job. Good observation there. Okay, so again, it depends on what you want to do. You can do a reference like so, or you could add the text if you want to. So, okay. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out, Chris. I appreciate that. Okay, so what I did here is I've created my gauge blocks basically, and I'm ready to print. I want to test print this. Actually, the other thing I should probably do is create my piece that this is going to fit on top of. So let's just do the exact same thing. I'll start with a circle. Let's make this 1.5 inches in diameter, just for fun. And then I'll do 0.5. So let's just say 0.5. I'll stop my sketch. I have my sketches turned off, so I'll turn those back on. I'll say extrude. And again, I might go a very specific distance. Let's say 0.125 in this case. Okay. Then I'm going to turn that sketch back on, and I want to select this other profile. And I've shown this tip before, but it's kind of buried. It's actually underneath. It's right here. But instead of having to rotate, I can actually just click and hold. And it allows it to kind of probe through the part. And you can see it's going to first find the face, then the profile, and then the bottom face. So I can go ahead and select the profile and extrude this up. Now, again, I could be very specific. This is coming from the bottom, so maybe I want to see how accurate my printer is. So I might say I want my post to be 1 inch tall. But because it's going through my part, it wants to cut. So we're going to change that from cut to join. And it's actually going to join those parts together. And then finally, I'll come in here, and I typically put a small chamfer on the edge. So let's just say like 0.02 or something like that. Maybe even a little bit larger, 0.04. Let's do that and say okay. That way it kind of helps guide the gauge blocks onto the post. So, okay. So now I'm ready to print. So there's a couple options here. Again, I'm using the new user interface, and I don't know if you saw the video that was just released about the update. There's a lot of really cool enhancements, and one of them is talking about the new user interface. So I'm going to come over here into Tools, and here is my 3D Print Make icon. So under the Make pull down, we can do 3D Print. You can get a quote from Proto Labs. You can do, 100K garages, etc. But we're going to say 3D print. Now you'll notice it says selection. And so if I pick on this guy, it's only going to select this particular part. If I try and add in this one over here, you'll notice it unselects that, and it's only going to print this particular part. Okay? So by saying 3D print, it pretty much limits you to one body. Now I'm going to show you a really cool workaround to get past that. Okay. So let's go ahead and pick on this one here first, and I'm going to talk about this 3D print menu. So I'm going to zoom up a little bit here. So the first thing, it says preview mesh. If I don't have that turned on, you don't really see anything, but I like to have that turned on, and I can kind of see the accuracy, if you want to call it that, of this 3D print. It's basically the refinement. So you'll notice here it says there's going to be about 850 triangles to make up this curved body. Right now it's set to medium. If we change it to high, you can see it went from 850 to 1720 and a lot more triangles. Okay? So again, depending on what you're trying to print and how accurate you want that to be, you might want to increase your refinement. Okay. I can say low, and you'll notice 400, or you can say custom. And what that allows you to do is to actually come in and kind of tweak with your surface deviation, your normal deviation, and this minimum edge length I use quite often. And you'll notice it's set fairly high. And if I look at it kind of from the top, it's kind of hard to see because of all the triangles, but basically there's like really large triangles going back and forth to create these curved surfaces. But if I bring this edge distance down, you're going to notice the part's going to start to change what it looks like. So I'm going to kind of keep cranking this down a little bit. So instead of big long triangles, it's now kind of broken down almost into like quads, like these little squares of triangles. And you can get nicer looking results, again, depending on what you're trying to print, by changing some of this deviation. Now, 99% of the time, I just use these. But if I was doing something with really complex surfaces, I might want to come in and specify my surface deviations and my minimum edge lengths, and even you can change your aspect ratio of how strong those are. So you can kind of see how basically more edges are being created for this vertical post here. So that is your refinement options. Okay. And then we have this output. And you have the option to send it to a 3D print utility. Okay. Now you'll notice mine says Cura, and that's because I actually have Cura installed on my machine. By default, you'll probably see like Mesh Mixer, Print Studio, and Preform, and Custom. But let's say you're using Simply 3D or Cura or Slicer or whatever some of the other ones are out there. If you don't see that in here, all you have to do is click on Custom, and then you'll notice this little folder icon, and that's going to allow you to go out and point to where your slicer is at. So for example, mine is in Program Files under Ultimaker Cura. And all I have to do is point to the Cura application, and then that will show up in my pull down list. So that's how you add in your own slicer into this list. So I'm going to say Cura, and I'm going to say OK. Now what this is going to do is it's going to start up Cura on my machine. Unfortunately, it takes a little while to load up Cura, but it's going to only bring in this particular part. But we'll notice a couple key things here. It shows me what that's going to look like. I have all my settings. It has my printer in here, etc. But the important thing is notice the orientation of it. And again, this is because we did the Z direction pointing up. Okay? If I didn't have that pointing up, it would be rotated. And what I mean by that is it would come in, let me bring it back, Cura, hopefully. Oops. Let me move this over so you can kind of see it. My part might come in looking something like, in fact, I've seen it before, where it's basically at 90 degrees to the table. So it would come in looking something like this. Okay, if I didn't have that Z direction up. Now, that's okay. All I have to do is come in and say, rotate, and rotate that 90 degrees. But I don't want to have to do that every single time. So again, make sure you say Z up. Okay. My next tip here is, what if I wanted to print all of this at the same time? And when I clicked on this make, it only let me pick on one of these at a time, even though I'm holding down Control or whatever, okay, or Shift, doesn't matter. It's not letting me print both. So to get around that, all you have to do is a right mouse click at your top level in your browser and say Save as STL. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and notice this time it's giving me my preview for all of the parts, and this looks pretty similar. There's some slight changes, but the key thing is, notice it still is going to allow me to send to my 3D print utility to Cura. Okay. So I find myself actually saving as STL more often than clicking on the 3D print icon, because I typically kind of position the parts the way I want in Fusion, and then I'll say print. Okay, the only difference you'll notice now is you'll see this format, binary or ASCII, and then you'll see this structure, one file or one file per body. So if I were to say one file per body, it's only going to output, you know, basically 2 files here. Okay, I'm going to leave it 1 file. I'll leave my refinement medium in this case. And if I do not have this turned on and I say OK, it's going to allow me to save this locally onto my machine as an STL file. I could email this to somebody, I could put it on a flash drive, whatever, you know, take it out to my machine or whatever, okay? Or I'll do that again, save as STL. This time I want to send it to a 3D print utility, Cura. I'll say OK. It's going to bring up my slicer, whichever one that you have selected. Hopefully, I'm looking at some of the chat window. I can see people are saying, oh, that's great about the Z up, and I hated it when my prints were rotated 90 degrees. So hopefully you're learning how to resolve those. But notice what happened this time in Cura. So you'll see it actually brought in all of my parts, and I'm ready to slice. Okay, so I'll go ahead and slice this really quick. I clicked it twice, so it says unable, but now it goes. There it goes. So it's going to take 2 hours with the settings that I have. I'm actually printing something else right now with really high infill, so that's why it would take so long. I obviously wouldn't have that much infill. Layer view, we can kind of slice through. And the thing I love about designing parts in Fusion is they are always watertight. Unless I do something majorly wrong, you know, I design something in Fusion, I send it to my printer, boom, it's done. It's that easy. So, okay, so with that, hopefully the main tip there was to create some gauge blocks to try out the tolerances on your machine, okay? So we determined basically 0.029 is the difference between this shaft and that hole. So how would I do that in my designs? So what I would recommend doing, let me switch back to solid here, is I would create a parameter, okay? So I'm going to say change parameters, and we're going to create a user parameter. And I could call it whatever I want, but let's just call it tall for tolerance or something like that. And what's the expression? I'm going to say 0.029. I'll say OK. And I now have a user parameter called tall. So as I'm creating my new part here, let's just go ahead and design a block or something like that. And I've put a hole in here that I want to have. I'm going to say that's 0.5 plus whatever my tolerance is. So I just start typing in like TOL, and it's going to become 0.529. Okay, let me edit that again. What did it do? I wanted the hole to be 0.5. So I don't have to remember, okay, everything that's 0.5 now needs to be 0.529, blah, blah, blah. All I have to remember is I want that to be a 1/2 inch hole. Then I'm just adding in that tolerance. And the reason I like doing this is because maybe I do a test print and it's not quite enough. Well, I could come in here and say, for example, let's go into my parameters. So I'm going to just I did the S key. Hopefully you guys know this shortcut. S brings up your shortcuts and you can search. So I'm just going to search for parameters. And I'm actually showing this because of a live stream earlier on when I was talking about parameters. Somebody said, oh, you can't edit your parameters when you're in the sketch mode. And that's sort of correct. There's no menu that says change parameters, but I'm able to find it through my sketch search. And I can come in here and say, okay, my parameter, let me move my screen so you can see this. So let's say instead of 0.029, it's now 0.05. Watch what happens to my circle. You saw how that got larger. Okay, so I can come in here and change this all day long, and it's going to update all of my holes. Okay. So that's how I go about doing this. So like, let's do something else. Let's say 0.125 plus tall. Okay. So now that's going to be 0.154. Let me move this out so you can kind of see that better. So again, all I care about is that's a 0.125 hole, but then it's going to figure out what it needs to do to make the tolerance correct. So, okay, hopefully that makes sense. And if I were to print that, the post would fit down inside of that part. Okay, I'm glancing over at the chat window, making sure everybody is hearing me okay. It sounds like people are learning lots. I love the S key. That's really cool. The next tip I'm going to show you is a little bit different. And this has to do with, oh, actually, before I do that, let me back up a little bit. I started out by showing these gears, right, that didn't quite fit. So all we did is we loaded up my son's 3D model. He spent a lot of time designing this gear here and stuff like that. You can kind of see what it looks like. And we just went in and edited the sketch for the hole and added that 0.029. And now we can actually put these together. Let me try and assemble this all at the same time. Live on camera, right? It's a pretty tight fit. Let me do the small one first. But it actually does mesh together, and we can see how smooth, and there's no slop or whatever in here. It's a really nice fit. In fact, if anything, it's a little bit of grinding going on. But now we're able to show how these gears interact with each other. So solve the problem using that little bit of tolerance. The next tip I want to talk about is assembling large parts together, where, for example, my printer isn't the biggest printer out there. It's only got about 120 square millimeter bed and height, so I can't print really large objects. But on something like this, for example, this helmet here, it's actually broken down into a lot of smaller pieces. So I think it's kind of hard to see, but these are a lot of smaller pieces. And there's a neat tip and trick with lining those parts up. So for example, I've got these two blocks, and I want to glue them together or line them up. And I don't know if you can see here, I've got these little pieces of filament sticking out of the block here. And on this side, there's little tiny holes, okay? And all I have to do is basically line those up and snap it together. And you'll see how that's perfectly lined up. I could glue this together and even help strengthen the thing if I were to glue this. So I'll show you how I went about creating these little pins like this. And all that is extra filament. So all I do is stick a little piece of filament in there and trim off just to leave a little bit of a post like so. You can see right there. Everybody has filament laying around. So what I did was create basically a block of filament. So I'm going to expand this open. Let me go into here. And I'm just going to load this guy up. So you'll see I just called it filament. And this is the exact diameter I need for my filament to fit in a hole. So let me go ahead and tell you what I mean by that. I'm going to measure this guy, and we can see that the diameter is 0.07, okay? But if I were to actually measure my filament, let me turn this guy on real quick. It's 0.069 when I measure it. So I've figured out what size hole I need to create in my parts for the filament to fit in nice and easily, okay, without having to force it in there. So then I'm going to use this little piece of filament. So for example, if I were to, let's just create, I'll keep it simple here. Let's just do a box. And I'm going to make this, 2 inches by 2 inches, let's just say, by, I don't know, 0.75. Let's just do something like that. Okay. What this is going to allow me to do is I can then come in and use this body. So let's just go ahead and move it into place here. I'm just going to kind of get it where I want. Okay. And I want to make sure it sticks out. So this is 1/2 inch in length. So I'm going to come in here and let's just move this guy. I'm going to start to drag, and this is kind of a cool trick here. You'll notice that it's referencing right there. Okay. I can click this little down arrow and say re-anchor. And what this is going to do is you'll notice it's saying that it's moved from this back face 1.308 inches. So it's measuring from that back face. But let's say I want to measure from this front face. So I'm going to say re-anchor and click on that front face. And now you can see it's saying it's about 0.5 inches from that face. So if I start to drag backwards, I can go minus 0.25. Okay, and we can see that sure enough, it's basically halfway buried into the part. So that re-anchor command is really, really cool. Let me show you another example. I'm going to come in here and just say press pull. As I start to drag, it's saying I've pulled it about 0.418 inches from where it was. Well, maybe I want to specify the total length, not the little distance here. So I'm going to say re-anchor, grab that back face, and now it's telling me the whole length. And I want the whole length to be 2.12345 or something like that. And that's what it's going to do from this back face. So I use that re-anchor command a lot. So pretty cool command. Okay, so now I'm going to just basically, copy this guy and paste it. So let's just drag that over a little bit. And honestly, I could be very specific with the dimensions if I want to, but in this case, it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to, I forgot to say create a copy. So let me do that. I'm going to say move, say create copy, and then I'm going to start to drag, and it'll allow me to do that. And I typically do 3 posts kind of to register from. You could get away with 2 if you wanted to. Then we'll come in and let me just go ahead and mirror this block. So I'm going to say mirror this body here on that mirror plane. I'll say OK. So let's just call this block 1 and call this guy block 2. Yeah, O2. Okay. That way I kind of know which is which, right? So I'll turn that guy off so we can kind of see what's going on. But then I just say come in here and combine. So the target is going to be that guy. And the tool is going to be these 3 pins, basically. Okay. Now I'm going to keep the tool because I want to use it again on the other side. So I'm going to say keep tools. I'll say OK. But if I turn these off, you can see that it subtracted those out there. These holes are exactly 1/4 inch deep. And then when I go to print this, it prints the little holes in there for me. Again, hopefully you can see that. And I just stick the filament in. I don't really care. I don't measure to make sure they're exactly 1/2 inch or whatever. I just stick the filament in there. I lost my large piece of filament, disappeared somewhere, so I can't show that anymore. But I stick it in there and I just trim it off with a pair of snips or whatever. And then that allows me to line these up. Okay. So let me pull that guy off. So we get something that looks like this. I usually put them all on the same side. And then we can line them up and print. And what I really like about this is I created this rectangle in the top to make sure, those really do line up. And it helps with strength. So that's another tip that I use for creating some of the larger prints. So hopefully you learned some tips and tricks on creating prints with Fusion 360 with creating those gauge blocks. You know, I showed, so these guys, I showed the post. I use this all the time. And even when I like switch filaments, sometimes some filament changes. Now I use Hatchbox. I really like it a lot. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but if I were to switch to like Amazon Basics or something like that, I would probably do this again just to make sure that they print pretty similar before I start, you know, wasting a lot of material and going to assemble them together and realizing that they don't work. So with that, I hope that you learned a lot. We just released a new version. Please make sure you check out what's new. I'm going to be showing some of what's new here in upcoming live streams. The fact that we can now bend sheet metal parts along an edge, like along a sketch line, I am absolutely ecstatic about. And we did a lot more enhancements besides that, but you can tell I've been waiting for that one for a while. I'll be showing that. I'm also going to be doing another cutting board. I did one a while back on, you know, basically creating some blocks and kind of copying and pasting. And somebody put in the comment about how you can use the pattern command, where I was like, oh, you can't pattern because then you can't slice through the part. I learned something, and I can't wait to share that with all of you. It saves a huge amount of time. So I'm going to be showing how to fix that cutting board that I created earlier, and then I'm going to show you how to create another really cool cutting board. So you'll see that in an upcoming live stream. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Make sure you subscribe, leave comments, topics you want to see, and I'll see what I can do to help all of you out. So see you on a future live stream. Thank you.